Welcome to the fourth webinar in the series of 7 webinars on AI. I'm Ed Gaudet, the CEO and founder of Censinet, and today I am pleased to be joined by Will Conaway, the President and Chief AI Officer for Tuxedo Cat Consulting, and a good friend. Welcome, Will.
Great to be here, Ed. Great to see you again. I always enjoy our time together.
Yeah, we got a lot to cover today, so let's get at it. Before we do, though, I will bring attention to the other webinars that we have. Some of them are on demand, available on demand. So if you just go ahead and register, you'll see some you can still register for. And then these three are on demand, and these three are will be happening later next week and the week after. So you have some time to register for the remaining three. And again, the first three are on demand, available at the current at the current registration link. Okay, so we're going to talk AI governance. We're going to talk boards. We're going to talk how fast things are moving. We're going to talk cybersecurity. We're going to talk risk and GRC. We got a lot to unpack here. So when we first, think about what's happening and we think about how quickly things are happening, I would still posit that even prior to AI coming on the scene, we still had a gap between cybersecurity and board governance and board oversight. What do you think, Will?
Oh yeah, this is a long-going issue here. So I will say this. I'm gonna tie the two in from the AI and the cyber thing here, and that is boards are now expected to oversee complex AI initiatives, not just approve technology spend. Also, the AI has to align with the organization's mission, its patient safety, regulatory obligations. For the board, key is that all aligns to the overall objectives of the organization, not just a department, or to be seen as a technology item only. For the cyber part, AI's systems, they increase the attack surface and the connectivity in clinical devices by connecting isolated legacy medical equipment to networks and cloud services. And they really facilitate the data analysis, the monitoring, and AI model updates. So we have a lot moving that we didn't have just a couple years ago. This is really heightened connectivity, creates new unmonitored pathways, which I think we all are referring to now as shadow AI, for ransomware, data breaches, and malicious exploitation of patient data. So we're seeing some things we haven't before. We're also seeing some frameworks come up, what HHS frameworks, where they're looking at mission resilience imperatives, cyber programs led by the Office of Information Security that exist to manage, I would say, an advanced department-wide cybersecurity initiatives that really protect the mission by safeguarding those critical systems, the data and the infrastructures, and the word I like to use, ensuring resilience against evolving threats that we're seeing in healthcare. HHS is really there to protect the health and well-being for all Americans. So we're seeing that. I'd also say we're seeing some other guidance right now when we talk about are boards equipped. I don't think they are. We're seeing stuff around the National Association of Corporate Directors, the NACD. I know you're very familiar with that. Their guidance continues to emphasize that boards must strengthen cybersecurity and technology risk oversight through clear community ownership. So we're seeing more of that too. And I would actually say, one of the questions that I'm seeing up here right now are quarterly board cycles that do not match the tempo of AI. That's like one of the smartest things I've seen. Everybody should be asking that right now. To complement that, or I should say to complicate that, AI models, they evolve rapidly, with updates often happening weekly or monthly, far outpacing board meetings. So, we have to be very careful there. It's interesting. I just read a study the other day about healthcare noted that 93% of surveyed organizations experienced at least one cyber attack in the last 12 months.
Yeah, if you think about it, a decade ago, or longer, it was all about data breach. It was all about
Yeah,
data. It was confidentiality of data, etc. And then, right around 10 years ago, we started to see the first ransomware attacks.
yeah.
And those changed the game. They raised the bar. They went from a data issue to an actual operations issue. The ability to continue operations
Yeah.
in a meaningful way and recover rapidly from these attacks. And now, like you said, the attack surface is geometric, the
Yep.
increase with AI. And boards have to get ahead of this. They've got to recognize that this issue is just getting harder and harder. The risks are getting bigger and bigger. And they're not just data, they're not just ransomware anymore. They're direct data integrity and patient harm due to these LLMs and these other AI systems that are changing rapidly. And we're gonna unpack a bunch of considerations for folks on the call today, on the webinar today, and give them sort of a roadmap of things to consider and bring to their board. But folks, we've got to get ahead of this. This isn't like we had prior, 3, 4 years ago. We could think about structurally how we organize for cybersecurity. We could think about generating and creating a cyber committee. That time has passed. We now have to take action. Let's look at the next slide and let's look at the risks when things go wrong. We talked a little bit about this, Will. You alluded to some of these already.
Yeah, this when things go wrong, one of the things I just did, I'm going to have a shameless plug here. I just wrote an article at Forbes.com under the title "Algorithms on Trial." It's a hot topic right now. It's something we really need to get our arms around. I find that when the stakes are high, so to say, and the logic is hidden, and often it is, responsibility really gets problematic. When you think about it, if an AI system, if it misses a tumor or recommends a wrong procedure, who takes the fall? Is it going to be the doctor, the hospital, the vendor, engineers? We need clear legal guidance, and it has not caught up right now to what I would call the speed of adoption. And this isn't that, I'm going to say this is a new problem just for 26 or even in 2025, we look back. There's been documented cases that go back years on this, where there's been issues. We can go back to IBM Watson's for oncology, and that was like 2018. They were saying that they had some unsafe cancer treatments, so they could not use that. Another concern we have is around the cyber risk, and that is bad actors can manipulate AI in its inputs where it's going to really hurt the models and lead to maybe some harmful outputs. In healthcare, a vendor breach is rarely their problem only. And I hear that a lot. Well, what's that about for us? It disrupts care, it exposes PHI, it could break revenue cycle flows. That gets everybody's attention. If nothing else, will just talk some money. People get nervous there. The board is going to be asked right now, did we know this vendor used AI? What PHI data left our environment? What protections were in the contract? That's something we need to look at more carefully. Audit rights, incident notification, timelines, subcontractor controls. Did we know the workarounds at that point? So a board-ready response should be to treat AI vendors as part of the critical infrastructure that you have. Require that the current AI-enabled vendor inventory, minimum contract protections are there, clear triggers for board notifications, not just confirm the breach, but materials that operational or might have patient safety impact. The other thing we need to look at is the algorithm biases that is noted here, and that is bias claim a huge hinge of less of the intent and more of the evidence. So what I'm saying here is, what was the model used for? Was it used for triage, utilization management, scheduling, access, coding denials? How was it validated on your population, and what monitoring existed? And did you know when that the signals appeared? That's something we need to know. The board has to have a defensible posture at some point. They're going to ask, when can we show our work was had a risk tier to it, a classification, a pre-deployment type item, and were we able to do anything like pause it or have a rollback? And those are the things we need to know. I would also say one last thing on this here is the board will be held accountable for oversight that was never they were never probably equipped to exercise to begin with. And that means unless the system is built and the oversight system is built now. So the board takeaway, if you're out on the board right now, you need to require an AI inventory, including vendor-enabled AI. 2, you need to have a minimum of vendor contract protections and incident notifications of some type that are coming into you. and a standing AI risk dashboard that would have, I would say, with threshold-based escalation between meetings, because once again, the time is just too far apart. And if you're trying to get the board's attention on these type of things, and sometimes you have to shake them a little bit, if they're curious, healthcare still remains the costliest industry for data breaches by far. It doesn't mean they're the number one. Manufacturer is actually the number one for cyber attacks. But for healthcare in 2025, the average data breach cost $7.4 million. So
Wow.
that will get people's attention.
Real money. And it's becoming a fiduciary duty of care. And this is a way to wake up the board, stress the fact that this duty of care is now real and extends to the board.
Yeah.
They need to include AI oversight into their committees, into their processes, and not delegate it down to IT or some other organization.
No, you're exactly right. When you look at it, the boards must actively monitor AI risk and ensure regular education is occurring and document decision makings there. Legal precedence has to be there. And if there is some legal precedence right now, failure to oversee cyber risk can be considered a breach of your duty. I mean, we saw this as far back into the mid 90s with CareTech International has some issues. So we're looking, this isn't anything new. The tricky statement becomes, if you're sitting on the board, is how do you avoid black box vendor solutions? That's always going to be a tricky one. You need to insist on transparency and on independent validation. If you don't have those, you don't really have the process in there. A best practice is that vendors need to disclose their cybersecurity controls, incident history, and how they're testing for bias. I would say a warning to those serving on boards right now in healthcare is that, clinical AI is mission critical because it can directly impact patient outcomes, access to care, and regular exposure. So, I see a lot of people that when I was just talking with them here of late, especially talking about, good faith oversight looks like, and that is really a complete AI inventory, including vendor-enabled AI, pre-deployed validation and post deployment monitoring, drift, bias, performance things you need to understand. And drift is a thing that I think that the boards, when I have spoken with them, are very confused by. And drift means that the AI tools, the behavior can change after go live because in the real world environment changes, so do the models, and they're no longer operating under the same conditions that it was validated under. So drift is when the world changes, patients' workflows and data pipelines, and the model silently becomes less accurate, less safe than it was originally improved. So the board needs to get those down. And one last item I'd say is that they have to have KRIs, not KPIs, but their key risk indicators put in place because, fiduciary duty doesn't require technical mastery. It really requires probable oversight, and probable really referring to something that the board is capable of showing that can be demonstrated, verified, and established as true through some type of scientific testing.
That's right. And given that change and given the rate of change, what are your thoughts on the rate of updates and the rate of board oversight meetings and reporting? Should we move from this quarterly cadence that we have to something more frequent?
That's the right question to be asking. And that is the question that I think I get asked most with, as a consultant when people talk about the board. Bottom line is this: threats and vulnerabilities emerge in real time. A single missed patch or can expose sensitive data. Thinking that you can get together one time a month, and know everything. You're not. You really need to put committees together. You have to have people resigned out responsibilities of some sort on this. Once again, the drift is just the thing I'm seeing the most. It's just crushing in healthcare. To add to my prior comment, drift is dangerous because it's quiet. Nothing breaks, and the tool becomes less accurate and less safe. So, I always tell the boards when you're looking at cycles, you need. It's not one time a year is not going to do it. One time a quarter is not going to do it. You need to be getting some real time input. You need to understand the inputs, how they're going to change. The concept drift, I like to call it, and that's the relationship between inputs and outputs that change in the real world. And then, the one I've seen numerous times here of late that people get shocked at the board is the implementation drift, I'll call it. And that's the model may appear the same, but the pipeline changes, like an
Mm.
EHR upgrade. An example I've recently witnessed here, I was doing some work, was a vendor's update actually enabled AI features, and suddenly the alert rate started to double for the doctors. The clinicians started ignoring it. Now they've got a risk that's both operational and clinical that are going on. So, but to your point, yes, immediate notification on any AI type of alert and security incident must happen. That shouldn't happen in a meeting. You shouldn't be going to a meeting and people, here's all the things that'll happen. Material change and incident need to happen timely. Every meeting you have should include a briefing update on AI and cybersecurity posts. Those two things have to be together. And I would say if AI can change weekly and the threat actors can move daily, so quarterly oversight just doesn't seem to make sense.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And I want to probe on a couple things you said. Most organizations today have AI committees set up that are cross-functional, which is good. We've got clinical people, we've got operations, we've got IT, we have patient advocacy, all the right things. But at the board level, we also have to create a committee, like we have comp committees and financial committees and risk committees for AI and I would say cyber oversight. And to your point, if there was a standing committee at the board level, those committees could meet out of band off of the quarterly cycle, could deal with issues that arise during off-cycle, activities or incidents. So I think that's a really good point you make. And I think ultimately, as the state and the federal legislation catches up, some of this stuff might be mandated anyway. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I think we're already starting to see it. If you look at the SEC's 2023 cyber disclosure rules, those are already, we're starting to see, those include AI enabled system breaches. So, I mean, we've been doing this for the last couple of years. This isn't totally new. I'll say another thing that I'm seeing right now is like the EU AI Act, and we're seeing multiple states are introducing AI transparency mandates. Someone's going to have to look this up because my memory may not be right on this. I think it's California with their AB 331, which will do that. It's going to introduce AI Transparency Act. So, boards must, right now, they must ensure timely, accurate disclosures of AI risk and incidents to investors and soon stakeholders, obviously patients involved there. Failure will result in regulatory penalties and loss of confidence. I mean, you're going to lose some brand there. I've already seen New York and California once again with these type of systems. And I would also say that mandatory AI reporting in New York and California is critical for board members nationwide to be paying attention to right now, because it's going to set a new legal standard for fiduciary duties, risk management, and liabilities. No question. Once it goes somewhere, it's going to roll. And as AI regulations start to accelerate, these stringent and high-stake requirement acts, they're going to be a blueprint for other states. And they're going to start operating this, and you're going to watch it become more national. I think some of the key impacts we're going to see here I'm looking at your bullet point here is just absolutely fabulous. Boards are now expected to implement systematic oversight of AI, transforming AI risk and technical issues as core governance. I mean, that's it. And I would actually say AI washing liabilities, as seen in California and New York, misrepresenting AI capabilities to investors can expose directors to personal liability and reputational damage, obviously. I mean, and, I would also say one other thing, and I always like to quote people, but, Ron Reagan's, when we start looking for standards here, trust but verify. We have to be able to do this now. Third-party data risks are still there. That's something that we have to look at. Where does that all fit in legally? Companies must be accountable for the AI tools that, affect their employment decisions and ensure that third-party outcomes comply with safety and anti-discrimination standards, regardless of home state. And I think the great example of that is right now, New York law requires notifying the state within 72 hours if there's been a critical safety incident involving high-risk AI. And that's going to really demand a robust, proactive infrastructure that the board can get a hold of. I believe that is called the RISE Act that New York is under right now. So those are things that the boards better get nervous about, because the question isn't whether disclosure is coming. It's whether we'll be ready before the headline forces it. You don't want to be the paper and read about yourself, and, if we can't inventory AI, monitor it, and escalate incidents, we can't make credible statements to our regulators, investors, and patients.
That's right. That's right. In fact, that's a really good segue. It, it's a lot. It's complex. There's a lot to consider. We are behind, but you can get started tomorrow. There are several questions that directors need to be familiar with that they can start asking their organization. They can start putting it out there. You talked about inventory. Um, we talked about AI governance a little bit. But what is the process for evaluating third parties? Every business process, every clinical process today is dependent on a third party, right? Do we have all of those mapped out? And do we understand our critical functions in the event that something bad happens, like a Change Health?
Oh, yeah. This is the question. Yeah. I mean, that's tough. I would say you can't manage what you can't see. So we have to be careful when we look at these 5 questions. They're great questions. Shadow AI is a growing cyber risk. I mean,
Mhm.
the HSCC, and for those out there, that's the Health Sector Coordinating Council. They have a whole new document on this. I was just looking through recently, and I got to get more familiar with it. Their best practice around annual AI system inventory includes vendor-owned and house tools. So it is there now. I mean, you have to know what the vendor is up to. And that's really going to something going back to something you said, Ed, that I thought was just brilliant, and that is we need to know who's accountable for the AI governance. We need to have clear roles around the chief AI officer, the CISO, a committee with board reporting duty. There
Mm.
can be no orphaned responsibility. Third-party risk. They can be the number one cyber threat in healthcare. I mean, you mentioned Change Healthcare. I mean, nobody saw how big that was going to get.
Mm.
The board must require independent risk assessments of vendors and contractual risk transfer mechanism. If not, they just don't have things under control. Also, we have to immediately get ongoing monitoring with audit trails, fairness metrics, and cybersecurity controls. Without those, we're going to have a lot of issues. And we also need to require post-development validations and incident reporting to the board. We don't see enough of that. After things get put in, sometimes they get off to the side and people don't pay as much attention. That's when the trouble can start. So, we really need to have AI specific incident responses that include, cyber attacks, system failures, patient harm scenarios, and the board must be able to review and approve the plan. You know, I would also say when I look at these 5 questions here, the first thing that comes to mind to me is these 5 questions are not a nice to have. They are the minimum viable oversight for clinical AI. The second thing that gets me is the goal isn't to slow down AI. And I have heard this when people come and talk to me. They go, Will, what are you
Mhm.
doing? You're coming in here, you're a consultant. Why would you do this to us? Why do you hate us? My goal isn't to slow you down. And I hear that so often, but it's to make
Mhm.
sure that you can scale without surprises to patients, regulators, and the balance sheet.
Yeah.
I'm doing you a favor. I'm really doing you a favor when I'm asking you questions. And these are
And
five
it's
questions I don't
happening.
ask.
That's right. And it's happening with or without you being there because they have an inventory of systems that are already in deployment, already implemented, and they are taking AI updates, whether they know it or not. And then there's, like you mentioned, the shadow IT. Clinicians are purchasing AI-enabled tools because they can enable better care. It's happening. So we have to get ahead of this. We can't just bury our head and say, we're going to slow it down to think we can slow it down or control it in any way. It's if that's the approach, it's probably worse than you realize.
Yeah, and I see one person that just put a good comment here. I just want to make a quick statement to it. I love their comment. They put, I think the impression is that healthcare boards are much more involved and active in the space than they really are. That's true. Most of your boards, especially in the smaller places, they don't even have the people on that board who even understand what I'm talking about when I come in and explain things. One, they don't understand technology. AI is in another realm to them. I mean, they no clue at all. So
Mm.
yes, we have a lot of people on boards who probably are, as I mentioned early on here, they're not equipped at this point. I'm not saying it's their fault. These are new things that have come up. There are some new regulations that are coming around that we're seeing that is going to require experts of this type to be sitting on the board, and hopefully that will help some of this because there's a lot of education and training that needs to be done. And I don't know who asked that question, but that's
Yeah.
a brilliant question.
Well, and just to really highlight that point, because it's a great point, just because you have an AI committee set up with cross-functional representation, and just because that AI committee reports quarterly at the board level, doesn't mean you have board oversight. Board oversight, I believe, requires a dedicated board committee that's actually staffed with people on the board, directors on the board. And if you don't have that level of expertise, hire for it, add to it, right? Maybe when you have another board member retiring off the board, the next hire is in someone that understands cyber and someone that understands AI. And there's plenty of people out there that do.
Sure, they absolutely do, and it needs to happen immediately. I mean, things are moving too fast, and I will say the other problem that I often see when I talk to board members is even when some of the larger healthcare systems do have some good people on board, and they do have good reporting systems that are quickly coming back to the board, they
Hmm.
don't know how to respond. If you don't know that, if someone's giving you something you don't understand, it's really hard to get a good answer
Hmm.
to it. So they're in a bad situation. It just needs to be revamped.
So, in your experience, what does some of the best board reporting look like? What are some of the key KRIs that people are focused on reporting quarterly on?
You have to have your key risk indicators. That's the first thing I do. You need to really bust that down into your clinical, your financial, and also you can bust that down into other things. You have quality, but you have to have the right people around. Maybe your CISO's got to be involved in that. I actually am a big fan of having the CISO on the board if possible, or having them a member. I know people are like, no, we would never have that, but you have to have your CMI on board. You have to have your CISO on board. Your CIO should be involved in this, but I will say. For a lot of CIOs I'm seeing out there, AI is really causing them a problem, and CIO is soon going to stand for career is over if they don't get it put together. But you need things that are quick. You need number type AI systems, cyber incidents that are involved in AI, bias and fairness auditing type things, patient safety events linked to AI, and any third party AI exposure. Those are minimum things that you would have to have. The boards really need to, and I mean, you have it right here at the AI reporting. I mean, boards really need this. They need a small set of outcomes that are linked indicators that tell them whether the AI is safe, fair, secure, and controllable. Sound familiar to anybody when we start talking about ethics in this
Hmm.
and real workflows? So the board can spot any deterioration early. You want to catch them up quick. You want to, and the thing is, you want to have the trigger actions put in place that you mentioned, Ed, between the meetings. Who's gonna notify things? Who's going to be in control of things? So, I'd say AI risk scores used by case tiered. What's the current exposure for the AI? I would say bias and fairness are outcomes materially different across patient subgroups. Our third-party AI exposure, which vendors have AI embedded in their care and or their revenue cycle, their PHI. Where does that look like? Do we have the ability to roll back support if needed? Clinical AI incident trends. That's where I think that I hear a lot of people who are pretty familiar. A lot of the boards at the larger hospitals have a lot of extra, a lot of physicians that are on those boards, so they understand when you start talking to clinical incident trends. So what was the run state and your misses, clinical report issues, model drift, rollback type things, and your patient safety metrics have to all be there. So really what we want is we want to put something together. What I am seeing is, I won't call it a best practice, but what I'm seeing is best practice maybe today, because I would hope, just like AI, the worst AI you have is today. It only gets better each day. So I would say these measures that we really want, the type of things I just mentioned that need to be put in place so the board is allowed to make three moves. The first is, can they approve something and make and a good approval? They understand what they're approving. Can we pause and roll back if something goes wrong? And do we kind of have a fund at risk retirement based in there, based on evidence, not just reassurance? Can we get to those steps?
Yeah, really good, really good. And there's tools out there that you can look to that can actually provide some contemporary guidance. There's an ANSI accredited governance AI governance tool for healthcare that's just been released by HSI. And I actually, full disclosure, I was part of that committee that put that together. But it's one of the best, I think, one of the best documents on how to think about AI governance holistically. It's not just cyber focused. The HSCC does have a cyber AI governance project and guide ready for publication, so that should be published any day now, and that will focus on the cyber aspects of AI governance. But this tool is about putting together a defensible, standards-based program that you can measure progress against, and it will really help you align your overall oversight and governance program with the rest of the industry. This is what the rest of the industry will be leveraging over time.
I congratulations. I did not know you were part of that group. I think this is one of the best tools I have seen, the best platforms, and that I we need something like this, and this is great. I mean, board involvement, is industry best practice, and it's a compliance requirement now with this, and that's what it had to be. We have to have some compliance around it. I think the other thing is what I like about this program and what it makes very useful for directors out there is that the standard is built on an end-to-end governance framework for healthcare AI, and we don't see that anywhere else.
Hmm.
That means it's covering the full life cycle of development, procurement, to development, to monitoring, to continuous improvement. And the thing I like with emphasis, there's a big emphasis on this on the leadership accountability. We haven't seen that in any other program. We also, I mean, it also has the nice regulatory alignments in it, the data governance, and the ethical considerations. This is really good. I think what directors can ask for to make compliance real when I look at this is, show me the AI inventory and show me which are the high impact items, your clinical decision support, your triage, your documentation. And once again, I'm sorry, people, the revenue cycle. If you've ever worked at a hospital for a long period of time as an executive, if you don't think revenues mentioned in every board meeting, you're wrong. I mean, that is like, you lead off with that. The other thing is, show me the government or the governance charter.
Hmm.
Who owns approvals? Who owns the monitoring, the rollback, how exceptions are escalated between board meetings? Who's doing that? And also, I'm a big fan in this, show me evidence package, validation results, bias testing, cyber reviews, those type of things. I need to know is the kill switch there and the vendor accountability. Once again, if you don't have vendor accountability, you don't have any accountability. You could be really in trouble soon. So have audit rights, model change notifications. You want those, you want data restrictions, and how we enforce equivalent standards across those parties. It's very important. So really for any organization, your brand, and I view this as a brand tool. This is why I love this so much. Your brand may be your most valuable item. You need to be able to reduce legal and your reputational risk. If you can't do that, you're going to lose business. You're going to lose credibility. And I'm going to tell you, I've seen the government before. Once you get on the naughty list, they find things on you and they fine you. So, set your organization apart from regulators, partners, and patients. Be doing these things now. This is standard care for governance. We're not just investing in expectations after the incident. And that's where you need to get. Don't be
Yeah.
doing governance after. View governance as a standard that turns things into a repeatable management system that can define, measure, monitor, improve. And for your black belts out there, I'm a Lean Six Sigma black belt. I always looked at this as one step more, and that was, can you define what you're doing? Can you put the metrics around it? Could you have a historic analysis of why we've gotten here? If you don't have that, you need to have that. What are you trying to improve? And maybe most important, how do you get your organization into a constant state where you're not going to drift back into bad things?
Yeah, great point. And you mentioned accountability. It's so important to make sure that that chain is well understood, and the links are strong between the board and the operations folks, and delegating it down to IT is not going to work long term. IT has to be involved, as does clinical and other operations groups in the organization. But your point about accountability is so spot on. All right. So what does it look like when you have good oversight?
Honestly, I don't see it that much. So,
Okay.
yeah,
It looks like a unicorn.
it's not something you see every day. Yeah. I mean, but I would
No, but
say,
I like this point about the policy approval process. Have you seen actually governance committees and policies going through the board for approval?
I have. It's not often. It's back to the
Mm,
question the person asked earlier. I usually see that they become a signature. I won't say quite a rubber stamp.
yeah.
Some of the boards are much better than others and ask a lot of questions, and I think they get to the answer. Once again, you don't have to be a AI, designer or a technology expert. You don't need to be a CTO to be able to take data, assemble it, and make good decisions. You need about 70% of the great data to move forward with a 100% good decision. I always say, and Colin Powell used to always say that.
Yeah. I
But
love that.
you know, I believe that what we really need to do is just we need to when you talk about that the board must really formally adopt and review AI guidance policies. They need to be part of that system. That'll help them out. That'll help because someone mentioned it earlier in their infrastructure on there, and this is part of that. I would call it the infrastructure, a different type of infrastructure, not where your
Mm-hmm.
CTO is talking, but how we put things together. So make it a real document, define the scope, whether it's clinical admin, risk tiers, high impact AI, approval gates, monitoring, rollback requirements. I've mentioned that 3 times now. Have rollback requirements in place. That's a lesson I don't see enough places do. And I'm going to just explain this real quick because I know someone's going to ask me, and I get asked this all the time. A rollback is a pre-planned way to quickly undo an AI change or disable an AI tool. So you want to be able to return to the operations that you know are safe, known as a safe state if AI starts causing any harm, errors, instability, or compliance risk. And really that's going to involve 4 things, and this is good. This is what good oversight looks like when you can do this. When you can turn it off, you have a kill switch. Disable the model so the feature stops influencing care or operations immediately. Revert to a prior version. If you can go back to a last validated model prompter configuration, that's nice. A workflow fallback. Doctors love this one, by the way. That switch to a previous non-AI workflow, where you have, maybe clinician-only decisions or manual prior auth wording type things. And you have to have some type of restore supportive component. That is, rollback relates to data mappings, a threshold, or integrated logic somehow that can change output. So those are things we're
Mm.
looking at. I would also say AI changes once again faster than the board calendars, models, prompts, and data pipelines. So once a year review is not going to work. So good oversight is not once a year. And I would also say approved is not the same as controlled. I just had this talk the other day with some people. Approved is not the same as controlled. I told them, without clear approvals gates, evidence packaging, and a kill switch criteria, AI can move from a pilot to production without consistent governance. You're causing yourself trouble. So keeping the
Yeah.
annual policies and reviews, that's fine. You want to compare yourself year over year, but you really need to have these 4 or 5 items in
Also,
place.
too, I think, look for benchmarking as well. Look for peer
Oh yeah.
benchmarking. Look for, a standard risk management framework like NIST AI RMF and any benchmarks. Censinet does an annual benchmark study on this, and we just are in the process of releasing our current study. You would not believe the what we're finding from adoption in healthcare to the AI RMF and the gaps that exist today. So having that peer insight and having an understanding of the gaps in your program is important because that lays out sort of your maturity plan and your investment, your asks, if you will, from the board, your investment pack, where you're going to lay out the gaps in your program. You're going to show what other peers are doing. And then you're going to ask for certain investments to close those gaps over time. So I think combining that with what, a good oversight program and doing it on, like you said, not just annually, but doing it continually is really important.
I'll say one other thing, and you brought this up a little bit earlier. The other thing is assign accountability to a subcommittee or a board member. I keep finding that the other thing, and one of the things that drives me nuts, and I don't care what industry you work in, is when I hear the CEO come in or someone comes in and they'll say, AI governance is everyone's responsibility. The minute I hear that, I know it's no one's responsibility.
That's right.
Have someone accountable
Yeah.
for it.
Well, it's why we have failures, right, with oversight because we've delegated it to somebody without maybe responsive with responsibility, but not accountability and not authority. And it does have to be the province of a board, I believe.
Yeah, and I'm going to get someone yell at me about this comment, but why boards have historically underperformed? They have. Boards have treated cyber as compliance, not
Mm.
resilience. It
Right.
has to be part of your resilience. I also see the cadence mismatch all the time. Quarterly oversight cannot keep up with the pace of the rapidly, vulnerabilities that can happen, high velocity social engineering, and the weekly model updates. Also, once again, third party systems, I think the risk was so underestimated. Change Healthcare showed how one single dependency can create I'll just call it a sector wide disruption. And, one I don't hear enough when I'm talking to boards and people setting this up is that, metrics have always been kind of, I will say, IT flavored and not mission flavored for healthcare. So boards need patient safety, continuality type things, indicators for downtime, time to restore, core clinical revenue functions, and manual workaround readiness. Those should all be put in place now, not later. And as noted, there's this breach of financial duty that can happen. AI is not just a technical issue. In healthcare, we were seeing AI frequently. It's embedded in the clinical workflows. I mean, all you have to do is walk into your EHR, your imaging, your triage, documentation, all is and just tons of AI now in there,
Yeah.
where the primary risk is a patient harm, not a system performance. So we need to look at things, differently. IT controls things, but the board must ensure quality and safety.
Yeah, and you brought up the vendor AI governance aspect earlier, and just now it's so critical that we get a handle on not just those internal systems, which obviously are important, but the external systems that we rely on. And
Yeah.
most, if not all, business processes and clinical processes have a third party attached to it.
Oh yeah, there's no question. I mean, third-party exposure can be a dominant driver in healthcare disruption. No question
Hmm.
about it. I mean, I've seen study after studies that really reinforce the cloud, account compromise, supply chain. That's something. There's a whole section, just a whole,
Yeah.
article we could have on that. We could talk for hours on supply chain, ransomware. That was already brought up. Business email compromise are all common, and that across these attacks, what we're seeing is most organizations report a disruption to patient care. I think that's the crazy thing. Even when you're talking supply chain, ransomware, business email, it all will get down to some disruption on the patient care. So the board, as you remember there, you need to be looking at your vendor ecosystem as part of your clinical safety system. They're all part of they're part of the same thing now. The board needs to a complete list of vendors using AI and clinical workflows. They need to understand where that's coming from. And that will require really contract clauses for cybersecurity, audit rights, and incident notifications. And once again, make the embedded AI visible. It's tough to do, I get that, but require vendors to disclose where AI is used. Is it in the notes, maybe the triage, the coding, the pre-auth or prior auth, patient messaging? What are those influences on whether AI behavior can change versus the silent updates that happen all the time too. I mean,
Hmm.
I can't tell you the amount of times something gets updated, nobody knows about it, and there's where you really have to kind of get in the legal part of things. I would say clarify data workflows with a BA or a business associate status. Anytime there's PHI that's going somewhere to subcontractors, and often we don't know that because they work under the same company name. When something like that's happened, or it can happen, or there's a sub processor, and there can be HIPAA information in there, require a BAA. If there's a business associate, you generally need a business associate agreement in place. That's my rule of thumb. Don't separate the two. If there's an inherited HIPAA obligation, same thing. Subcontractor, you think there might be a subcontractor. Get those things in place now. Insist on governability, not just functionality. If we can get the access logs, detect drift, pause in the features, we don't control the risk so much. So it should not be used as high impact workflow. So we need to get those things separated out.
Yeah, and again, if you want to more context on any of these topics, the first three webinars, again, I'll give them another plug. The first one was with the actual lead that drove the ANSI committee, the ANSI designation for the AI governance document that we talked about earlier, Dr. Hamed Abazadigan. The second one was with Dr. Samantha Jacks, and that was all about third parties. And then the third one we just recently had last week was with Eric Decker, the CISO of Intermountain, and that was all about systemic risk. So check those three out for more context regarding what Will just mentioned. All right,
Yeah,
we're
I
going to
got
go
one
into
last comment on that. And
yeah.
you said something that just clicked in my head, and that is true that vendor management is where government really becomes real. So your governance becomes real at the vendor management part. I would say if you can't see it, you can't test it,
I
you
love
can't
it.
monitor it, you can't shut it off, you don't control it.
If you don't have a vendor program, you don't have AI
Yeah,
governance or governance. Yeah, I love that.
exactly.
All right. So what's the most common mistake you've seen?
I would say the most common mistake I see is treating AI like an IT upgrade instead of a change in how the care is delivered. I've seen organizations assume that IT can just handle it. So the first time the board hears about an AI tool is after it's already influenced in notes, triage, denials, because it was just a feature inside a vendor product. In
Mhm.
healthcare, that's really backwards. It's backwards in any industry. The risk isn't if the server goes down, it's that the workflow quietly shifts and the tool becomes authoritative without anyone noticing it. And in the board needs to understand these rules. And if one of the things that I heard someone say the other day, and I kind of laughed about this, is that you can delegate keyboards to IT, but you can't delegate accountability to IT. So we need to really draw back in and know where these things are going. And also, I would say, I'm looking at your second bullet point here that just grabs me. I've seen this too much, is that the general counsel shouldn't be the person who shows up at the end to wordsmith your contract, by the way. I see that is something I always see. The GC should be in the loop early because AI creates just messy loops of overlap of patient safety, privacy, IP, marketing claims, disclosure timelines. So in practice, the GC should help you translate those things that we always hear, your cool features, into enforceable obligation, audit rights, model change, notification, incident reporting timelines, and anything else you need to do that might go sideways. So if IT, a good way I like to look at it, if you want to view IT as the brakes and the steering, and your general counselor, that's the seatbelt. If you want it, you want them buckled in tight before you hit the highway, not after it.
Yeah, no, good point. We're going to go to some of the live Q&A. So this question is about architecture and the place of architecture in AI deployments. Do you have any thoughts on that? How forward thinking should we be from an architectural perspective?
Now, we're going to talk architectural and design, or we're going to talk architectural about how, like, where the CTO would design things. I think there's a two-way approach there. From the architectural design, I think this is a good question. We often don't see engineers in explaining how things are designed. I think that's one of the things we do. I think that really goes back to the vendor type items, though. I think we need to approach maybe a vendor and any homegrown applications very much the same. And that is, we need to understand what is the purpose of a thing. So I would actually take 5 steps to this. And the first one, once again, you have to be able to define it. Do we know what we're defining, the objectives, and how we're going to use it? If we don't, we're never going to be able to solve it. We're never going to be able to fix it. We're never going to be able to control it. We have to have metrics around it to see, is this getting better or is it getting worse? Because we all know what a good metric tells us. It tells us where we've been, where we are today, are we going to hit our objectives? Then we have to have a historical understanding. That is something that we often don't do. Why are we doing this to begin with? Are we doing this for patient care? Are we doing this for governance? Are we doing this for more dollars? And what's the improvement process? What is the goal? I see too many organizations that are putting in AI right now. They talk about ROI, but they don't know what they're trying to improve. It just fails. What are you trying to improve? And how do you get this into not just a constant state, but a constant state of getting better? So once again, if you're putting in AI, you need to know what it is, because theoretically, the worst AI you have is the day you put it in. It should get better with training every day.
Yeah, and architecture absolutely should have a seat at the table, should be front and center. I know from our perspective, when we started to look at building AI into our infrastructure and into Censinet, we took we took an architectural first approach. We set
Interesting.
philosophical, if you will, and principle based objectives, secure by design and secure by default. And then we built a plan to support each one of those pillars. And so if you're building AI systems or you're incorporating and integrating AI systems, they definitely have to be architectural based and architectural forward. And then if you are incorporating third parties again into your workflows, into your business processes, into your clinical functions, you do need architectural oversight to ensure that the third parties, the suppliers, are doing the right things architecturally. So I do believe that that is very important to your overall program. All right, so the next one is,
And I see that's actually Sherry Duvall's question there. If people aren't familiar with Sherry, please get familiar with her. She's absolutely outstanding.
yeah, that's TTIC and
Yes.
Metagram. Um, okay, so this question's about have you found that all AI vendors are 100% truthful with what they're reporting or in the contract? So seems like there's not a good way to make sure the AI is working as said unless something goes wrong. So how do you validate and verify the claims of third parties?
You know, I hate to say this, that I think most vendors try to be accurate. I don't think it always ends up accurate. And here's what I mean by that. I think we buy products and we expect one type of performance from them. And I don't think always the vendor selling it understands what we want. And there's where the trouble gets in. I you know, the vendors need to be, I think for the most part, try to be truthful. But I think there's, as, and I'm going to move away from the board. I'm going to talk about the technology people reviewing these. We need to do our own breakdown of the product. And one of the problems that I see, and this is a governance problem here that gets really bad, I find one of the problems I have is a lot of the people within our tech fields, and even our CIOs and our CTOs, they're not always that familiar with what the organization's objectives are. So we're buying products and we're hoping to get one type of performance out of them. And we have people who are really looking at how's that going to affect them, their department, more than they're looking at the organization as a whole. This is where the board could get involved and where leadership has to get involved. The people in technology need to be more advanced in their knowledge of business, the dollars, and what the use of these products are. And that way we won't have these questions about why did you buy something from somebody? And it's not working the way we should. Or, you know, this is nowhere near that the product we thought we were going to get. And I hate to say it, this is why a lot of times your smaller vendors who are trying to get in the organization struggle. We have more trust in, you know, there used to be the old thing when I was a CIO years ago that, you know, you don't get fired if you use IBM, you know, and we have to watch that because I think there are some vendors we probably have too much trust in, and there's some vendors we don't have enough, but ultimately it is a responsibility up to the people in technology to understand the business goals, objectives, whether they're clinical, whether they're going to be dollar wise, whether they're going to be regulatory. They need to have that all fleshed out before they start these assessments.
Yeah, and you'll have to assess those third parties on standards-based approaches and frameworks that are available. We talked about NIST, the AIRMF. There's NIST, the cybersecurity framework as well. You have the IEEE UL 2933 standard for clinical medical devices. We talked about the ANSI, the governance standard here. So there's a number of guides and frameworks and standards that you can draw from as you build out your program. Let me get to some of these other questions here. So this question is an interesting one. How do you reconstruct the decision chains the authority covers? So when you think about questions at the board level and framing those to handle any type of operational gap, how are you ensuring that when decisions are made, you've got some, audit trail in place to, if you have to
Yeah.
revert back to it to figure out, okay, what happened? Did we make the right decisions? Who made the right decisions, et cetera?
Yeah, I'll tell you, one of the things I helped put together, and I will just call it a board level checklist. And this just doesn't have to be for the board. This could be for anybody. I think this is a very important thing. The documentation, I mean, we all know in healthcare, if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. So we need to view that the same way when we have, anything around AI and cyber. So We need to look at what the AI disclosure and change control, that's an item that I always have on that checklist. The written disclosures where AI is going to be used, plus advanced notice and model prompt and feature changes. We need to have that immediately. We need to have audit rights and evidence. I would say stuff around like SOC 2, the right to receive security, privacy assurance artifacts, and the high impact workflows, the availability to validate claims and inspect relevant controls. Those are things we need to look at. Also,
Mm.
login and traceability. We talk about the documentation there. Access to logs need to be there for every event, so we can look at the inputs, the outputs, timestamps, something that is so important. Version, user action, and quality and safety things around compliance and safety investigation. If it's PHI and BAA stuff, we need to include training and tuning, retention type items there, and anything around, the incident notification things, AI plus cyber, which are so vital and happening right now. Define timelines for notifying your security incidents and AI failures that could be, that could create patient safety operation things. And once again, I know I've mentioned this, two things you have to have. Make sure you're documenting your rollback and your support SLAs. I'm not a big fan of SLAs, although I've never seen a contract, especially in healthcare, where they're using them. Don't view your SLA as where things need to be. Once again, that's the minimum of where things should be. So understand, the root cause analysis and the regulatory responses that you need to have to all these things before it starts. And the last thing I'll mention on this is I like to run scenario plannings in two ways. I hate lessons learned, by the way. As a black belt, that's something that drove me nuts my whole career, that we'd wait till the end of a project or the end or an incident to happen, and then everybody would want to talk about it. Well, nobody cared after it happened as much. Run your scenario plans pre-mortems. Know what could go wrong before you even get in there. When you're talking to your vendors, your contracts, your negotiations, you're talking your documentation, run through that beforehand with your group of experts and the board. Talk about these are the things that can happen, because you don't want to make approvals after bad things that happen. You want to make approvals, to correct these things that happen. Get those in there. Get your pre-mortem in place. Do your scenario planning as you go. Do your lesson learned while things are going on. Once a week, those should be part of your committee meetings. You should be tweaking things as you go, not after the incident's already happened.
This next question, little controversial, but let me read it. Um, there's an impression that health system boards are much more involved and active in the space than they really are. Most health system boards, particularly for smaller systems, are community leaders that have no professional clue about any of this. The
Yes.
concept that they're going to be involved deeper than an annual briefing on AI strategy is naive. So it's from an anonymous attendee, of course. But
Yeah.
okay, so maybe it's naive, but the question is, who cares if it's naive or not? The real question is, will these will these leaders be sued? Will they be sued because they did not have the right
Mhm.
oversight? They didn't do their job as it relates to, again, that duty of care that we talked about earlier. That'll really be the question. And case law will prove out whether or not it is naive to even have them consider going deep or not into this. Your
Yeah.
thoughts, Will?
Yeah, I think we answered this a little bit earlier. So it is the right question. They're absolutely right. I don't think board members are equipped to handle what they're being put on. I think we need to get new people. When you were reading that, the one thing that just pops in my head is the old Oscar Wilde quote that the bureaucracy is expanding to meet the needs of the expanding bureaucracy. I think sometimes we just keep shoving more people on things
Yeah.
and nobody's equipped to do anything. And so we put three more people on there, and, not qualified. Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, we saw this with the SEC once again, that, the DOJ, Homeland Security. We're seeing people getting in trouble for this. I mean, this has been going back for 30 plus years. I mean, this isn't anything new. We have to get the people in there. And Ed, you said it right earlier. We have to start, matriculating. My football term there. We have to start matriculating people in that understand this. They can start helping out the board understand things better. I mean, we're never going to look at a hospital board if you go in there and see 10, 12, 14 individuals. I mean, some have more depending on if they've been
Mm.
given money or donating things to the hospital.
Yeah.
I mean, you see a lot of people on boards that for strange reasons, unfortunately.
Yeah. All
But
right.
we have to bring people in.
We're just about time. A couple of last minute next steps for boards. This document, if you don't have it, go ahead and download it. get it off the HSI website. Again, it's a great way to start and to move forward with your journey for board governance of AI systems. Let's see what else we have. We talked about resources. There's a lot of resources here with the slides. We'll send these out afterwards. Take a look at some of these links for more information. The HSI link is in there. The NACD link is in there. The third-party AI risk document that Will had alluded to earlier by the Health Sector Coordinating Council. Link to that. Check that out as well. And then, of course, a shameless plug for Censinet. We can help you out with all of this. Will can help you out from a consulting perspective. Reach out to either one of us if you want more information or do you want to see this in practice. Thank you very much, Will, today, and
Thank
thank
you.
you for folks for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you on the remainder webinars in this series.